What do you get when you cross a tactician with a filibuster? The story of Mitch McConnell's political career.
Hi, I'm Garrett, just buzzing with curiosity today.
And I'm Leah, feeling really intrigued about today's topic. Welcome to Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett.
All right, let's set the stage for this one. We're exploring Mitch McConnell, his long career in the U.S. Senate, and how he led the Republican conference, the rules, the maneuvers, and the lasting footprint he left on the courts and on how the Senate works. Here's a thought I've been turning over. The first time I heard the word filibuster, I pictured a cartoon character with a big mustache twirling a baton. It sounded goofy to me at first. Then I learned it meant a senator can keep talking or procedurally stall to block a vote, which is a lot less goofy and a lot more powerful. Not gonna lie, that kind of blew my mind.
Let's open the book on this. Mitch McConnell is the senior senator from Kentucky, and he has served since 1985, which makes him his state's longest-serving senator. He also became the longest-serving Senate party leader in U.S. history, from 2007 to 2025, sometimes leading the majority and sometimes the minority. That's decades of shaping what comes to the Senate floor and when.
Quick glossary while we're here. Filibuster. That's a Senate tactic to delay or block a vote, usually by extending debate. You generally need 60 votes to end it, and ending it is called cloture. Cloture is just Senate speak for closing debate and moving toward a final vote. And the nuclear option, despite the dramatic name, is simply changing Senate rules by a bare majority to lower vote thresholds for certain actions, like confirming judges. Once you know those three, a lot of Senate strategy starts to make sense.
Picture this. McConnell's biography starts in Sheffield, Alabama, born in 1942. As a child, he had polio that paralyzed his upper left leg. He was treated at the Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute, which likely kept him from lifelong disability. That early hurdle shows up later in how he talks about resilience. His family moved around with his father's Army postings, and by high school, he was in Louisville and already student council president. In 1963, he attended the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered the I Have a Dream speech. He later said that mattered to him. It's a surprising note, given how people now see his politics.
Then comes the pipeline into national politics. He graduated from the University of Louisville, then the University of Kentucky College of Law. He briefly enlisted in the Army Reserve in 1967 and was honorably discharged after a diagnosis of optic neuritis, which is an inflammation of the optic nerve that can affect vision. He worked in Washington for Senator Marlowe Cook, a Kentucky Republican. That's where he learned the rhythms of the Senate. In the mid-1970s, he served in the Justice Department under President Gerald Ford, alongside legal heavyweights like Robert Bork and Antonin Scalia, both major conservative legal figures, and Judge Lawrence Silberman. Back in Kentucky, he won local office as Jefferson County Judge Executive in 1977, and again in 1981. That's like the chief county administrator before the Louisville-Jefferson merger. And in 1984, he squeaked into the U.S. Senate. From there, the climb was steady. He chaired the National Republican Senatorial Committee in the late 1990s, became Majority Whip in the early 2000s, and after 2006, led Republicans in the Senate for nearly 2 decades.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Early in his career, he had a more moderate label. He once supported abortion rights and public employee unions. Over time, he aligned with conservative orthodoxy, and biographers describe this as moving in step with a changing Republican Party. A big public fight that defined him was campaign finance. He opposed the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, often called McCain-Feingold, arguing it restricted political speech. That culminated in the 2010 Supreme Court case Citizens United versus FEC. The court's decision loosened limits on independent political spending and helped expand super PACs and other independent fundraising groups. McConnell saw that as a First Amendment win. Critics saw it as unleashing money that would distort elections.
Strategically, he became famous or infamous for procedural chess. He used the filibuster, holds, and the Senate calendar to slow or block the governing party's agenda. Political scientists call a lot of this constitutional hardball, meaning using the letter of the rules to push the limits of norms. The effect is twofold. The majority loses time and momentum, and the minority avoids taking many visibly unpopular votes while still shaping outcomes. He once framed the debt ceiling as, quote, a hostage worth ransoming, not a warm, fuzzy metaphor, but it tells you he was willing to leverage deadlines for policy concessions.
Why would slowing even bipartisan bills matter so much?
Because floor time is scarce. If you can force leaders to spend a week clearing a small hurdle, something else falls off the schedule. Over 2 years, that adds up. Fewer total policies get across the finish line, even if each delay seems minor. It is, a kind of slow-motion veto.
Judicial nominations became his top priority. From 2014 to 2016, after Republicans took the Senate, confirmations of President Obama's judges slowed dramatically, reaching record lows in Obama's final 2 years. Then came 2016. Justice Antonin Scalia, a conservative icon on the Supreme Court, died. President Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, then the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, to the court. Under McConnell's leadership, the Senate refused to hold hearings or a vote. He argued the next president should fill the seat. Many scholars called that unprecedented in modern times. Supporters said the Senate has the constitutional right to withhold consent. In 2017, with President Donald Trump in office, McConnell led Republicans to extend the earlier rules change and eliminate the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations via the nuclear option. So the threshold dropped to a simple majority. That cleared the path for Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, all nominated by Trump. Each confirmation was intensely contested, Kavanaugh's amid sexual assault allegations, and Barrett's on an accelerated timeline after Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death in 2020. The net effect was a durable conservative majority on the court.
Shifting to legislation during Trump's first term, he shepherded the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which cut corporate rates and changed individual taxes. There was also a partial Dodd-Frank rollback for smaller banks, reforms to post-crisis financial rules, the First Step Act on criminal justice reform, and the Great American Outdoors Act funding conservation. But not every plan worked. Republicans failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act in 2017 despite unified control, and that stung. In late 2018, the government shut down for 35 days over border wall funding, the longest shutdown on record. Then the pandemic hit. After some initial hesitation, he backed major bipartisan relief like the CARES Act, massive direct payments, and business lending to stabilize the economy. He later said states should be allowed to declare bankruptcy rather than get more federal aid. States cannot do that, and he took heat for it. And then in 2021, he corralled enough GOP votes to help avoid a debt default. That's the pragmatist coming through to avert market chaos.
The post-2020 chapter is complicated. After the 2020 election, he waited for the Electoral College to certify Joe Biden, then publicly acknowledged him. On January 6, 2021, during the electoral count, he rejected attempts to overturn the result and later called the attack a failed insurrection. He said Trump was practically and morally responsible, but in Trump's second impeachment he voted to acquit, arguing the Constitution does not allow conviction of a former president. He also blocked an independent January 6th commission, saying other investigations sufficed. His relationship with Trump was often tense. Trump publicly insulted him, and McConnell mostly avoided responding. In 2024, he announced he would step down as Republican leader in January 2025. Republicans later chose Senator John Thune of South Dakota as the next leader. In 2025, he said he would retire at the end of his term in 2027, and in 2026, he was hospitalized after being found unconscious and has not appeared publicly since. Details remain sparse.
2 texture points I don't want to skip. 1, he was known for steering earmarks to Kentucky before a 2010 ban, targeted spending for home state projects. 2, his approval ratings were often low, sometimes the lowest among senators in polls, yet he kept winning re-election. That's a paradox of nationalized leadership roles. And even as his leadership wound down, he sat on key committees in the 118th Congress, appropriations, agriculture, and he chaired rules, which meant ongoing sway over spending priorities and Senate administration.
Let's dig deeper into a live debate. Did his tactics contribute to democratic erosion, meaning a weakening of unwritten norms that help democratic institutions function, or were they lawful checks in a polarized system? Real talk, I see the case for the latter. The Constitution gives the Senate broad control over its procedures. The filibuster and holds are part of that toolbox. In a system designed to slow sudden change, minority protections can prevent whiplash and forced negotiation, even if that negotiation sometimes looks like stalemate.
I hear that, but I'm kind of on the other side here. Political scientists like Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson talk about how repeated hardball raises the cost of governing for the party that actually holds the White House or the chamber. If the minority can invisibly block or delay almost everything, voters blame the visible leaders, and the incentive becomes pure obstruction. Over time, that hollows out norms like presuming a president gets a basic level of staffing and judges, and it nudges the system toward paralysis. That feels, like erosion.
Why not see it as the system adapting to polarization rather than breaking? If parties are far apart, then procedures that require supermajorities can cool things down. And remember, he sometimes stepped in to prevent systemic harm, like helping avert a debt default in 2021. He also worked with Democrats on huge pandemic relief. That suggests a line between hardball on policy versus stability for the broader economy.
That's a solid point. Maybe the distinction is using leverage to shape outcomes versus normalizing the idea that majorities do not really get to govern. The Garland blockade is the flashing red example for me. You can say it was constitutional, the Senate can withhold consent, but once that becomes the playbook, both sides take notes and trust drops. Then the only durable wins are judges and rules changes, which are the exact areas he prioritized.
Keeping it real, that tension is the heart of his legacy. A master of the institution who made it harder for majorities to act, but who delivered what he believed were the most lasting outcomes: lifetime judges and a conservative Supreme Court. Legal scholar Sanford Levinson would call that a clash between constitutional design and evolving democratic expectations. Not exactly a light lift to resolve.
On the culture front, he showed up multiple times on Time's 100 Most Influential People list in 2015, 2019, and 2023, which is mainstream recognition of his impact. And Donald Trump publicly insulted him in 2021 in a way that was not subtle. That clip ricocheted across media. Wild how that works out. The most powerful legislator in the party and the party's top elected figure at odds.
Counterfactual time. What if the Senate had held hearings and voted on Merrick Garland in 2016? If Garland had been confirmed to replace Justice Scalia, that likely would have shifted the court's balance toward the center, or center-left at least for a time. Then, when Justice Ginsburg died in 2020, a replacement like Amy Coney Barrett might still have moved the court rightward, but the overall trajectory could have been narrower. Maybe a 5-4 balance going a different direction for several years.
And that could cascade into real-world differences. The court touches administrative law, how agencies regulate, civil rights, campaign finance, and voting rules. Even a single justice can change which cases the court takes and how far the majority goes. So the policy landscape from the late 2010s through the mid-2020s might have looked different at the margins. Maybe different thresholds for agency power or different outcomes in election law disputes. It is impossible to know precisely, but the stakes are obvious. Lifetime seats magnify a Senate strategy into decades.
It also might have changed the political temperature. If hearings had happened and a vote failed on the merits, that feels different than no hearings at all. Maybe there's less tit-for-tat in later confirmations, or maybe polarization finds another path. That's the puzzle we can't solve cleanly. Stay curious about how choices in one Senate term ripple across years. History really does shape the present.
I'm down for that. Join us next time as we dig into another layered topic. That's all she wrote for now.